Genshin Impact. I think you know what this game is about. There are many reasons as to how a player can enjoy it. Some enjoy it for its fun combat system as you mix and match the 7 different elements. From making charged seeds to hardening yourself, there is an array of reactions to do. Oh, and there's the ever-expansive world that can be traversed from deserts, underwater ruins, snowy mountains to an island condensed with fog, filled with discoveries lying in wait for you. There's definitely never been areas where the devs explicitly made it out of the cruelty in their habits. Nope, never in a billion years. And obviously the reason why you clicked on this video. The many stories it tells. This game has a fun, deep, and very intricate lore that has spawned so many theories and community discussion, which overall leads to more intrigue as to what exactly is happening in the world of Tevad. The Conrian War. The war between gods. The ruins of Enkanomiya and its son children. And so many more to see. With your imagination as the limit. And a bunch of text boxes as well. All just hiding there in a piece of paper. But for me, having neat concepts and lore is great and all, but it is important in viewing what the game itself, get this, presents through their story. Not just some random text you have to find in a weapon or a piece of paper in a ruin that most players would overlook most of the time. Take a page from Kokomi's story quest. She's an individual that belongs to a lineage that worships a snake god called Orobashi who was killed by the Raiden Shogun, and at the same time is a general / overseer of her people that leads a resistance against that same individual. All prospects for an amazing character. But when it came down to it, she just became another overworked character trope. Hooray. Ultimately, it all comes down to one important key word. Execution. And with this game, it has been a mixed bag. Unvoiced story quests with lots of charming characters, but with lots of wasted potential. People like Jet and Rue would be better off voiced. The unnecessary padding in dialogue at times, making it feel a little bit bloated, such as getting our teapot, because that took way too long, and a particular quest that people have mixed feelings about. The Archon quest of Inazuma. Some like it, some don't. I'm the latter. There's no way to sugarcoat it. There was a lot of rough patches in it. It was simply bad in so many things, but there was also some highlights as well if you're coping. And as of late, I've always thought about those issues. And after finishing the Sumeru Archon quest, those thoughts shone even brighter. Ultimately, they did a better job in making me actually care in the story. So I made this video to collate all my thoughts into this neat little package. And there may be points that you might agree or disagree, but that is the beauty of having your own opinion. So please be civil about this. Note that I'll be looking exclusively through the lens of the Archon quests of both regions, as I am going to compare them. But I will still be referencing some story quests here and there to prove some points, but obviously it will still be solely about the Archon quests. Now it is time to discuss all the faults, the great moments, and everything that my tiny brain can remember, so buckle up. In stories, pacing is important, as it moves the story onwards and it sets the bar as to what exactly you're going to experience. It could be a slow burner or a very high intensity bloodbath. Inazuma, even with its shorter runtime, somehow drags itself for way too long, but at the same time, way too short. It juggles too many concepts and fails to execute them all properly. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Immediately, we can already see the huge disparity in terms of the length in these Archon quests. Inazuma only had 3 acts to work with, spanning 6 hours, while Sumeru's had 5 acts spanning 12.5 hours roughly. And that's not even including the interlude quest, which is also around 3 hours. But regardless of the length, they must take into consideration the time frame they have, or so I would think, since Inazuma having a shorter runtime would mean to make everything feel properly paced, but at the same time present all the themes that they want to without throwing up information dumps, and at the same time would still flow naturally. And since Sumeru doubled with that length, the writer should be aware of not adding fluff and unnecessary things just to increase the runtime. And Spoilers, only the latter succeeded. But credit where it's due, in the first act of Inazuma, it honestly did a great job at establishing the world and building its plot, though I didn't really feel much excitement. Apart from the ride and fight during the beginning, I thought to myself that surely all of these things is going to be a setup for something, right?
I'm Teppe.
As we began our journey in the Nation of Thunder, we spent the majority of it doing border inspection, grunt work, labor, more labor, and just when the action seems to pick up with the resistance, the rioters decided to marathon one of the most interesting parts of the quest, as we are only told that you spend time with the group, not really experience it. Wow, that was a great move. I will definitely care if for some reason one of these characters were to die. Simply put, there are way too many lows and way too little peaks in the engagement of the Inazuma Archon quest, as it feels like at some point, the writers were just going through a checklist in Inazuma, going as fast as possible through all the interesting plot points which are all potentially good, but in execution just feels incredibly boring and way too fast-paced. Throughout Sumeru, even in the first two acts, I was already pulled in by the story as we delve into very interesting situations, from getting into an Inception-like state, possessing people, exploring the ruins of pyramids, to fighting a mechanical god. Oh yeah, we also casually manipulated a poor NPC, but overall there was never a dull moment. But more importantly, the pacing was just right. We spend only enough time with Tighnari and not overstay our welcome, because we are still eager to explore the reaches of Sumeru and talk with Lesser Lord Kusanali. We were given time to understand the motivations and actions of people like Dunyarzad without feeling imposing like someone like Teppe, which is overall a drastic improvement. The conflict in Mondstadt is the people and Venti, who is their deity in disguise, face against a powerful dragon and that they must work together to subdue and defeat it. Pretty basic stuff. In Leeway, it is how their deity is testing the people of old and the people of new, how they must learn to put aside their differences for a common goal that they share. And the main conflict in Inazuma is its own people suffering because of their own deity. How the lives have been affected by her questionable decisions, from forming the Sakoku Decree, which is basically a lockdown that severely limited people's movement and freedom in what they can do. The Vision Hunt Decree, which has obviously affected the Vision Bearers, though affecting a minority, it has still been a great challenge for her people. It also showcases the corruption in the inner workings of the government, where they are even willing to compromise their own nation for their own benefit. And you might wonder why they are willing to shoot their own nation in the leg. They present to us one of the most justifications of all time.
The Fatui may think they are using me, but the reverse is true. After all, none can contend with the supreme power of the almighty Raiden Shogun and the Muso no Hitotachi.
A genius, some might say. A sword technique is truly a foolproof solution for every political crisis. And most of all, they hyped up resistance, but we all know how that went. Unfortunately, compressing all those things into 3 small acts is simply not enough, hence the pacing issues. Because on the top of my head, only the corruption in Rito and the Vision Losers were the only ones that were really fleshed out or had more thought put into them, which were all in the first act. The rest were just so bland because they tried to cram more and more things, but just left me with thoughts of the wasted potential that Inazuma could have been better, because nobody asked for the Teppe arc, okay? It doesn't help the fact that by the end of it all, it was suddenly less A's fault because, it's all because of the Tatui once again. The conflict in Sumeru is the tension between the lack of faith between its deity and her own people, and how all that boils down to the escapades of the 4 of us. Alright, the 5 of us working together. And it was handled well. It establishes the relationships between Kusanali and her people, the tension rising between the people of Sumeru and the people of the desert, the shadiness of the academia, and the trade and monopoly of knowledge, all encapsulated pretty well in just the first act alone. The rest of the acts don't try to add more ingredients to that metaphorical pot of Sumeru's plot, apart from the obligatory involvement of the Fatui, which I would like to point out is that it doesn't rely on them as the main precursor to all these events, but simply fan the flames as it is still rooted towards the academia. It's simply a nice change of pace. It just lets itself build up on all those things towards the rest of the acts. And I know that some events in Inazuma is rooted towards A's grief as well, not the Fatui, but at the very least, Sumeru had the decency to actually show their motivations instead of a few seconds in the finale of your act, because all she spewed out were some vague words like eternity or heavenly principles without giving us context, making us not really convinced of her story. The biggest problem for me in Inazuma is that it heavily relies on these set pieces and cutscenes, which on their own are really great, but doesn't dismiss the broken writing issues in its story, because sometimes it doesn't really make much sense if we really think about it, such as how the resistance group managed to invade Tenchukaku during the final act without any prior foreshadow or indication of them planning to do so. I mean, it was great and all to see Kazuha rekindle the vision of his friend and pire the shogun's Musono Hitotachi, but it doesn't overlook why and how they were there in the first place, as if they were just placed there for the sake of a cool cutscene. Because remember, the story thus far was them simply being against anyone who might go in Sangonomiya after successfully fending off the forces of Kujo Sara for a while now, because weren't they crippled of the delusions the Fatui gave out? So how would they have enough resources to stage an attack to what is literally the heart of Inazuma? It just feels sad that you have to watch some random character demo just to get a little bit of context for that to make sense. Which is unfortunate that the writing is so flawed that you have to patch up a very important detail in your story after having its conclusion already. The entirety of these acts feels like happenstance, how Thoma was chosen to be what was coincidentally the 100th Vision Bearer for the Vision Hunt decree, meaning there would be a ceremony to take place, and with it being so sudden, and with us conveniently there just in time to save his ass just as his vision is about to be taken, how we just so happen to be part of a climactic duel between the Resistance and the Shogun army, how Ye was conveniently there to save our skin from Scaramouche, and how none of these resulted from our actions nor was set up, just feels a bit cheap for the sake of once again cool visuals. All the things that happen around us simply happen just because. What I mean from that is how we are always constantly being directed by NPCs and playable characters into what we should do next. Though it is also a bit out to Paimon as per usual, we as travelers are constantly getting their hand held and never having their own personal thoughts as to what they should do as a player and as the character. The only independent thought that they had was to seek an audience with the Raiden Shogun, and all the other things were forced onto us unnaturally, because to this day, while the Vision Bearers were very sad and I really sympathize with them, I still don't believe that the traveler can easily change stances from those three people alone, considering that aforementioned Will did not budge during our stay at Rito, with the merchants equally suffering from unfair treatment and barely getting by with the profits they make, albeit not from the Vision Hunt decree, but it's still due to the Raiden Shogun making the Sakoku decree, adding inconsistency to the list of problems that this Archon quest has. And as a player as well, I barely cared enough about them to actually think that the traveler would feel motivated to help, considering the story that was shown so far. Just a shame really, because there's so much untapped potential for Inazuma to shine in its quests, but they just didn't do it. The payoff was all skipped also, because the Shogun never got her comeuppance. She was easily forgiven by her people for some odd reason, except Kazuha, cause he's a Giga Chad. With that said, I would like to steal a quote from this famous YouTuber called Nakey Jakey.
You had the T-ball set up! All you had to do was just whack the ball off!
Sumeru managed to establish everything from world building to its main conflict in leagues better than Inazuma. One obvious answer is because of the extra time they have, meaning they can better pace all the story beats and have breathing room to really flesh out everything they wanted to, and boy, do they land. There are two main goals: to discover the mystery of Irminsul, cleansing it in the process, and to overthrow the plans of the sages. And instead of trying to prioritize the advancement of the plot by using its characters like props, it builds it through our interactions with them, like sharing tidbits of their nation or aspects of themselves without sounding like some glorified Wikipedia page. We were not forced towards the next spectacle because everything made sense. It's not just simply due to a happy coincidence, but also from the driving actions of our character. Since due to the traveler's need to speak with the Dendro Archon, it resulted to us getting connected with Irminsul. It resulted to us encountering people, both good and bad, and it resulted to us learning about its world, making us more invested. Comparing that to us needing to speak with the Electro Archon and getting unrealistically convinced of helping stage a coup against that same person because you were forced into that. You didn't help Nahida because someone told you. You helped her because she helped you as well. It was a give and take relationship. And I'm pretty sure Ayaka lied because she did not do anything in her power to get an audience with the Shogun after we helped her because we only ate hot pot. There is still mixed reception in some parts of Sumeru that I've seen, but even still is not even comparable to Inazuma, such as the epilogue, as something that it is needlessly protracted and filled with the necessary dialogue. But personally, I like character moments like these because not only does it flesh out their character more, but it fits a nice bow into this story and properly sends them off. For example, we learned that Sino doesn't think that the sages have earned enough punishment for all the deeds that they have committed, as some players would also think. And it is nice to hear it from him through the quest instead of an exclusive event or through a voice line that you can't access if you don't have that certain character. I also love the small details that I put here and there now, like the extra dialogue between the banter of Alhaitham and Kaveh, or how Karkata comes to Tainari's aid if you finish his story quest prior to Act 5. And during the final act, we actually had a plan, and it even involved our newfound allies instead of us just blindly charging in because NPC number 19 died. To summarize everything in Razor language, it's just that both region, great concept. Only one do well, while other needed more time in oven. But one factor that could possibly redeem Inazuma is its cast of characters. But, oh boy, let's talk about them now. You know, in hindsight, I think I also shot myself in the foot for separating this from the pacing segment because they are both intertwined and I already have made some points that I might just reiterate, but oh well. Character tropes. While not inherently a bad thing, it can sometimes make your character predictable, but if done right, can elevate them by building up on that concept. I've noticed that Genshin likes to lean on these tropes and build up on them, as we can have your typical simple-minded himbo, an ESFP if you will, and place it into someone like Ito and create one of the best characters in Genshin. Or alternatively, be part of the ensemble of overworked characters with little spins to them. How about this one wants to work hard? Oh, and this one has too much work. And this one doesn't want to work. I'm such a genius. But actually, someone like Jean actually does these things because she wants to live up to her people. I don't care. Sometimes, these character tropes can ruin the potential the individual has even if they have one of the most bombastic backstories because they can still just be simply boring when we actually get to talk to them. All the pieces were there to make a fun and lovable cast in Inazuma, but they either lacked or had too much screen time, or their personality itself was extremely one-dimensional. Because the most developed character that I actually had any semblance of quote-unquote care was Teppei. But that care was only in the context of the story, because if you haven't noticed, I don't like him. Even people like Yoimiya and Goro were people I didn't care much about because I was forced to be with them for the story to progress, or were never given that much time to establish themselves as characters instead of a plot device, respectively. With Sumeru, I actually cared about most of the characters, from the relationship between Dia and Dunyazad, the Eremites led by the beast of a man called Raman, and all the rest because they were given enough time to establish themselves as individuals, not as plot devices to move the story forward. What I feel is that if a character is introduced in the main story quest of any region, is that unless they are just some cameo, they better be good. And they better leave some sort of impact because if done poorly, it just lessens their value as a character. An extreme case of this is Kokomi. Kokodayo? Show don't tell is a powerful way of storytelling, and her entire character is the complete opposite of that. Because the people regard her as a master tactician who is capable of creating amazing strategies to combat any eventuality, to chart and list all of them and have countermeasures in place. She was hyped up to be someone amazing, but we were only given the opportunity to see that in action once, during the confrontation in Nazuchi Beach. So how are we supposed to believe that this shy dork is capable of doing any of that? Because even with delusions sprawling amidst her people resulting in the crippling of the resistance, she seemed to be only aware of it when it was already too late. Oh, an anonymous sponsor gave us these things? Well, just take them all. I personally would have thought that she would say something along the lines of, I know these effects, but it was only my strategy. It's because we can use the delusions against a sponsor who I discovered through my investigation is the Fatui. But no, she just doesn't know. She was just clueless. In contrast to that strategic character archetype, Alhaitham's scheming showcases his great academic ability, which was especially highlighted during Act 5 of the Archon quest, not only through his words but also his own actions. His cocky demeanor is backed up by his prowess in being competent in combat and in deductive reasoning, and his morally grey status during the beginning helped us be more intrigued as to what exactly are his motives. He didn't throw up information that we would not easily internalize all in one go. The game took the time for us to learn more about him gradually as we progressed through the story, making us actually care about him. Bringing back the topic to Kokomi, I think the entire plot point of the Resistance was just simply wasted. There were so many potential hijinks that could have been done with Kokomi or Goro and even the crew of Beidou and Kazuha as they were reintroduced in the quest. How we can adventure with all these people, like dismantling the Shogun's front line or help prepare for an assault, but after they were used in the cutscenes and exposition dumps, they were never to be seen again. Until it's time for more obligatory information dumps and another cutscene. The main draw for me was the fact that a bunch of people banded together to fight for what they believed in, even challenging a god in the process. And simply casting all that aside just for Yeimiko to butt in is just sad. It could have been a showdown between the determination of the people against the unfaltering will of the Raiden Shogun, but instead we just solved everything with Yaimiko, rendering every setup beforehand mostly useless. Because did you know it was actually the Fatui's fault? It was also the puppet's fault. A herself is actually just misunderstood. And did you know that she likes dango milk? Oh my god, she's so relatable, right? She definitely did not cause the death of an entire island. Isn't she just so marketable? Oh damn, that actually worked. Once again, what ticked me off is that most of the cast in Inazuma seem to dismiss all her past transgressions just because she is the almighty shogun. Like, come on guys, you can have better standards. Apart from Mie being our Deus Vox Machina, she's also there to exposition dump every little bit of information that goes like this.
Yes, the true Raiden Shogun, who meditates endlessly in the plane of Euthymia to preserve her being. Her name is A.
And then is again explained by Paimon like this.
Are you saying that the one we met at the ceremony was just a puppet? And the real Raiden Shogun is the one that the Traveler met later?
Yes, Paimon, we get it. She just knows everything that we need to know for the story to progress because she is Raiden's familiar, meaning she most definitely knew that we were currently in a confrontation with the Balladeer in a random part of Inazuma. There were just way too many characters like Yai with the sole purpose of being exposition dumps that could have been taken advantage visually instead by showcasing it to us instead of treating us like a toilet. Like how we learned his backstory as to why they hate this person or whatever. I wasn't paying attention. Imagine if in Sumeru we would only hear the effects and the dangers of forbidden knowledge, instead of actually seeing it in action through the cutscenes and the affected scholars living in the refuge of Aru village. That would just break immersion. Case in point, in Inazuma we were never shown the strength that the resistance gained when using a delusion. Even with Teppei, we only see the aftermath with him dyeing his hair white instead of showing it to us. We only got more and more information dumps. Instead of blabbing about eternity and heavenly principles, it would serve her better if we were shown of its effects during the quest. But anyways, my biggest praise for Sumeru is that all the characters, NPCs included, don't feel disposable as the game develops these people as we meet them instead of just using them once or twice in the story and then they just disappear. We influence Nahida to become more confident in herself and gain that self-respect that she needed dearly. That one scholar that tried to connect with Irminsul was also used again. Raman changed his ways after learning of the true nature between Rukkhadevata and King Deshret. The people simply live their world. They're not just some static character with some set and defined characteristics, because they change. And I know that the theme in Inazuma is eternity and all, but I don't think they have to go that far with the characters as well. I could go on and on about all the characters, praising or critiquing them, but this video is taking way too long already, and I think you get the point. I think these two misfits deserve their own section, so here we are. During the beginning, it doesn't help Inazuma that the Traveler was written to be very apathetic. Okay, that's probably too strong of a word. Maybe dismissive during the first act. And that contradicts what was established before, which was the Traveler being an individual that cannot easily ignore the woes of other people. Even if they were charged for the wrong crime, they still wanted to help Liyue. So going from that to an apathetic person feels extremely inconsistent. Because it's one thing to sympathize but not do anything, and it's another to just outright ignore everything. It would have been fine if there was something significant that happened to make the Traveler act like this, but even before these events, the Traveler was fine in indulging Beidou in her tournament, and them meeting their sibling would probably not make them apathetic. Either way, this change is unwarranted and not welcome. Because if the Traveler really acted like this, then even if we were asked for help by the acting Grandmaster, we would just refuse, or not help with the cleansing rite of Morax. I can understand that this was a setup for the 3 vision losers, but there has to be a better way than this. In Sumeru, the Traveler is not as aggressive as their Inazuma counterpart, and is instead very neutral and is open to what is happening around them, which makes more sense. Sumeru played off similarly to Inazuma, wherein the Traveler wanted to meet the Archon of that region. But it didn't mean that they had to be ignorant of the problems they encountered along the way. Instead of the game trying to scream at us to care, it just made more sense. But setting aside the character study of the Traveler, what is great about Sumeru's quest is that Paimon is not just the Traveler's voice box. They have their own dialogue that establishes their characters. They become more expressive and actually feel like travel buddies that have known each other well throughout this journey. Such as Paimon's deep concern for us in the Samsara arc instead of just a chatty, clueless individual that always asks everything in behalf of us. And the Traveler's earned determination to overthrow the sages and save Nahida. And the occasional backhanded comments they gave towards each other as well. Those were pretty funny at times. Unsolicited Paimon-splaining. It is a phenomenon that occurs when an important plot point happens, and the writers now deem it important that Paimon reiterate it all over again.
Wait, so does that mean that I just explain everything even though it is unnecessary because someone might not get it?
Get out of my head! Get out of my head!
This phenomenon happens a lot, and it's not just exclusive to the Archon quest. The game feels obligated to explain it to us to the point where it feels like it is mocking us in our capability of understanding and grasping what is unfolding in the story. That was ever present in Inazuma, as I've already shown before. It breaks a lot of the pacing and it mocks the mental capacity for players to understand whatever story Inazuma still had left. And thankfully, they learned and there's less Paimon-splaining in Sumeru. And it's replaced more with internal monologue from our Traveler, which is nice. Conversations just feel pleasant to listen to. Such as when we swap bodies with Nahida. It was not Paimon-splained but just continuously flowed throughout the conversation. Hoyoverse has been trying to make the Traveler in general more expressive, as I've noticed since Inazuma. And I think it was a step in the right direction, but it was a step backwards when they did that old stupid character thing. Sumeru built upon that and learned from their mistakes, and this time it doesn't feel frustrating to listen to because we have more fun and meaningful banter with Paimon and the cast through the dialogue options. It made us more immersed. So that's really neat. With this section, I will be brief again because I realize as I'm making this script and video, most of my points have already been made once again, and I'm just a lazy ass to fix it. The Raiden Shogun, or I guess in this case, A, feels inconsistent as a character in both her writing and motivation. She is posed as the main antagonist and is written as a person who has secluded herself in a blade to maintain eternity, to never change for the sake of her not getting hurt again by losing more people that she cherishes. But with just one duel and a few words from Ye was all it took for that will to shatter. Her entire motivation as a character just change in what felt like a snap. At least that's how the Archon quest portrayed it, because I know it is all redeemed in the second part of Raiden's story quest, but that is besides the point. It feels immature that a deity like her acts like this, as in Ye's words, she is
Acting like a little child, throwing a temper tantrum and locking herself in her room. Don't you think?
But simply being aware of it does not mean that it excuses the poor writing that they have. Her story began with her acting as the sword of her twin sister Baal, who due to the Conrian War perished, leaving her alone, and slowly but surely, the people around her died as well, by the creatures of the abyss or by her own hands, which bubbles up into something very self-destructive for herself and her people. And all throughout, she always says that all of her actions are due to her goal of maintaining eternity, to be close to the heavenly principles, but never bothers to explain what exactly that is, making us less sympathetic to her. Because to us, she is only spewing out vague concepts that we can never possibly comprehend without any explanation. Thanks, Nahida. I had hoped that it would eventually be explained during any of the acts what that actually meant in the context of the story, because even during the end of Li Wei's Archon quest, Zhongli had already hyped us up for that, and for it not getting the proper explanation it deserves makes me care a lot less for the Raiden Shogun. Because the writers tried something to make her sympathetic, but she is so immature that it's just unbefitting of a god, acting so childish, which is ironic since Nahida, in terms of an Archon's age, is actually a child but acts even more mature considering they both had experienced such cruel things in their lives. To the defense of A, she is not the one in charge of making big decisions. That would be her sister, and her emotionally imbalanced and grieved state caused her to do all those actions. But my question is, did the Archon quest properly convey all of that? The answer is no. What about Nahida? She feels inferior towards her own people she is supposed to govern. She feels that they deserve better than her. She feels that she must work so much just to have an inkling of similarity towards her predecessor, and to that end, it was not only told, but also themed throughout the Archon quest without some arbitrary backstory or the dependence of outside things like their character demos and teasers. Though her teaser also elevated that fact, but we didn't need it to actually understand her story, okay? The Cabbage centers her character in living up to her predecessor by helping Sumeru in every way that she can. And even if she is part of the protagonist's camp, meaning we have more chances to interact, if handled poorly, we would probably not care that much. I also find it funny of the parallel between Scaramouche and A in storytelling, because with Scara's case, his backstory was actually presented to us unlike A's. And it was timely showed, and not just at the end of the Archon quest. We learn of his abandonment and the betrayals that he experienced during his life firsthand. And most importantly, this was not to redeem him, but to sympathize with him as we flesh out his character. And with A, the writers really wanted to redeem her, but it should have been done in the Archon quest, not in her story quest. And the parallel between Scara and Nahida as well in a more positive light, as they both have experienced similar situations but took it in very different paths. Both were shunned, abandoned, and even lost people that were dear to them, people that they trusted, people that they respected, people whose expectations they just wanted to meet. One took that as a disservice to their existence and took a dark path, hurting all the people around them with pure malice, while the other took it as a message that she must live up to everyone's expectations, which are both toxic in their own regard. Rejected and dejected by her own people, feeling lost and alone, but nevertheless she always felt compelled to be a great individual in spite of that. She just grew. No? Okay. While the other hid more in their shell to not allow it to be hurt ever again. Sound familiar? And that was ever present during the Archon quest, and it was a great detail I noticed, whether intentional or not. There's always moments in video games where you just actually tear up, and the scene with Ruka Devata, I definitely shed one. And I definitely did not when it was A's backstory. As I've already stated so many times in this video, Raiden, or A, has all the setup she needed to serve as a great antagonist, but also have a great redemption. All they have to do is present it and show it to the player. But they failed. Nahida's only crime was her Duk Duk. Inazuma had too many concepts on their plate, where they can't even manage to follow through with any of them. They failed to develop its wonderful cast of characters. They failed to have a satisfying conclusion to what was something that was hyped up by the community at the time. They failed to utilize the Fatui whatsoever, which I mostly glossed over this video because that would just take too much time as well, and it felt like everything was rushed at the last minute. In Sumeru, each detail just feels meticulously crafted, and I just love it to bits, and hope that they continue with this momentum of making great quests. Oh god, that probably won't age well. And that closes all my thoughts. If you've reached this part of the video, then thank you for staying till the end. So don't forget to like and subscribe. Nah, just thanks for watching. This has been Dese, and I hope you enjoyed your stay.